I'm Cyclon, and oh boy, I've got something for you guys. This is my variant of the Cobra Lash Deadeye, and I have to say it is a really amazing build for mapping and just really any kind of mapping. It feels really good once you figured out how to use it properly. I have to admit, early on there were some stages and some variants of the build that didn't feel that good, but once I got those figured out, it started to feel really amazing, really well, and I'm happy where it is. I'm happy to present it like this. So you can take it, you can try it out, and the best of all, it works with the Aura bot or with a buddy, so you can even play it in groups and you can play it as magic finding, and it's a super awesome build, but I'm grabbing ahead. Now, why do I go with Cobra Lash? Why didn't I just went with the Crystallized Omniscient Archer, a known and good build of this league? Well, it is known, but it's also very pricey. So I looked for not a cheap alternative, but an alternative, because I played Omniscience Archer last league. I had a lot of fun, but I wanted something different. And by that, I wanted something where I can again self-craft a good amount of stuff, and it still feels nice to reuse. And I found this build. I adjusted it until it was to my liking, and the version I'm presenting you is the one that I'm very happy with. As mentioned, it works with a carry, as a magic finder, and it's insanely good with Headhunter if you want delirium maps, delirium mirror maps, delirious maps, if you want anything that has a lot of rares, legion, it just gets crazy. Now, two things I quickly want to mention. I'm trying out a new format for presenting the build guide, and I would really appreciate if you could give me some feedback, if you could say what you liked, what you didn't like, if it was understandable, if something wasn't understandable, if I missed a part with this. As mentioned, I really just want some feedback so I can improve it, to make it more fun for you to watch, and also better for me to present. That being said, the other thing, I am using a kind of new scaling, new ranking for the different aspects of a build. Don't get confused by the colors. The colors are there just to differentiate between the three different states. They don't have to do with the ranking itself. If a build gets a 10 out of 10 in this section, it is one of the best in that section. A 9 out of 10 is almost the best, and then 8 out of 10 and worse is anything that is good in it, but just not perfect. So for example, this build in mapping, it can do any map in any kind of juice variation very, very well, very fast in depending on the map. Of course, it can do a full daily map in a minute, but you can do a simple map in a minute, you can do a daily map in a very quick time. It is a really, really good mapper, and it utilizes Headhunter to get crazy amounts of mapping speed. And even without, you have Tailwind, you have Onslaught, you have Elusive, you're really just running through the map very quickly, attacking very quickly. So mapping definitely a 10 out of 10. For bossing, 10 out of 10 is reserved for anything that one-shots any boss there is. So for example, the old Mana Miner, the Arcana Miner, or a current min-max Fizz Conversion Trapper, or a current for bossing min-maxed Omniscience Archer would be a 10 out of 10 bossing. A 9 out of 10 would then be any Fizz Trapper, any build that is specific for bossing and can melt Uber bosses as well as normal bosses. Now this one can do normal bosses, it can do map bosses, it can do delirium bosses in the map, so it is okay for bossing. It has a really good amount of single target, but it hasn't absorbed amounts of single target, so I cannot reasonably give it a 9 out of 10 or 10 out of 10. And for terms of survivability, is the same thing. A 10 out of 10 would need to be an immortal build. Something like using Aegis Aurora, 20 million EHP, tanks everything, regenerates everything, absolutely unkillable. And a 9 out of 10 would be similar. It would be something like my survival focused Aura bot that has about 300-500k EHP and is nearly immortal. It takes really a lot to kill it, a lot of juice content. And then comes at 8 out of 10 would then be something with 100k EHP or a bit more, and then other terms, all the layers of defensive survivability or defensive layers. And with that, I can say this is an 8 out of 10. It has a lot of defensive layers, it has a good amount of EHP, but I will come to that in a bit. Before that, just a quick overview of what you can actually do with this build, what content, if you do want to do that content, this build will work out for. So currently it really works well for Legion, Blight, Delirium. It has a lot of clear, so it just cuts through Blight lanes. At least the immune response Blight lanes in Delirium maps has been really well. Blighted maps, I assume it will work out well, but I actually haven't tried it yet. But because of being able to kill 100% Delirios Blighted in map lanes, I think Blighted maps will work fine as well. For Delirium, Delirium Mirror, Delirious maps, it's just amazing how good it clears. It works as a carry, you can use magic finding gear, it can utilize an aura bot, it is really amazing for using as a carry in juiced content, and I have a lot of fun with that. I'm playing with an aura bot buddy at the moment, it works out perfectly well, and I have added delving with a question mark because I'm doing a bit of delving for endgame grinds, and it works out for delving, but I'm not at enemy level 83 zones. So while mechanically it works well because you just clear everything, I need to see if at lower levels it still has enough damage without Headhunter buffs to be able to get to delve 600, or if it has to be a build that can only get to like 300, 400. I will post an update for that later on, but when I get there. But for now, I say delving with a question mark. It has mechanically works for delving, it's just a question of the damage, if it has enough damage without headhunter buffs for deep delving, because at some point the single target will fall off. And now we get to the defensive layers. Defensive layers, we are sitting at about 4k alive, we have 3k armor evasion, and we have 100% chance to suppress spell damage. When we go for it, if we adjust our gear specifically for that, we can fit 100% chance to avoid elemental elements. We can fit, we are a ranged build, we have a lot of mobility, so we can just position ourselves well for adding survivability. We can generate endurance charges with a specific trick, which we come to when we get to the jewels. We cannot be critical strike by anything that is poisoned, and we just need a tiny chance of poison with our huge amount of attacks. Anything that doesn't die after 1 or 2 attacks will be a rare or unique that we attack like 10, 20, 30 times until it's dead, and during that time while we are attacking it, it cannot critical strike us because it's poisoned, and poisoned enemies cannot critical strike. And then to add on top of that, we have about 50 life on hit. We have so many hits, it's really absurd how many hits we can actually do in a second. And that adds up to, in PoB, about 130k EHP. And on top of that, we have the cannot be critical strike, the mobility, the positioning. It is a really well survivable build. Once you get the hang of how to play it, it will be able to get to high levels. I'm currently sitting at level 95, running Delirium maps and dying maybe once in 3-4 maps. So I'm really happy with the defensive layers. For our damage scaling, which is basically damage scaling and the projectile scaling, it is, in my opinion, the main selling points of this build. It has a really absurd damage scaling, and that is we're using Divergent Cobra Lash. Divergent says that our projectiles get 0.75 increased damage with each hit and element for each remaining chain. If we scale that with ashes, with quality, and then having like 9 to 12 chains, it will add up very quickly. On top of that, we can use the follow through notable on projectile medium clusters, giving us another 15% increased damage with hits and elements. Then to finalize it, we can use Nightblade Elusive to get free 400 crit multi. We are converting all our physical damage to chaos damage, allowing Headhunter Inspired Learning to be there like, hey, I got a buff for you that gives you this extra elemental, you want that? And of course we say we want it, we take it, we deal more damage. It gets very crazy very quickly in maps when you have just a few rares killed. And then once we get to having killed a big target that has a lot of HP, we take point blank, stand up close to it. When it attacks, we dash behind it so we can consistently attack it. And then we have a lot of single target with point blank. And after that, we just have a lot of projectile scaling, claw scaling, and some crit multi. There are one Ascendency notable and one normal notable that actually have to do with chaos. Everything else is generic damage that works for physical, for chaos, and elemental. So we get a lot of scaling out of our damage. And if we all add that up, we have about 9 to 12 chains, so we get about 101 increased damage per chain remaining with ashes, with quality, with 4 follow-throughs. For our hits with 12 chains remaining, so the first one, if you use fork, the first 3 hits are 1200 increased damage. Then we have 800 crit multi. We almost crit every hit. We have Sniper's Rock with increased effect. We have our physical conversion. And all that is just a crazy amount of damage. Without Headhunter buffs, for in a map with fork and chain, instead of having high damage support skill, we're sitting at 9 million damage. Of course, this is a kind of idealized setup where we consider we have rage and stuff. So if you don't trust me, just go to the POB yourself. You will find it in the description. You can just take out some numbers and you will still be sitting at a minimum 700 million damage for the first few hits. It's really insane. Then if we take our single damage setup and still don't have Headhunter buffs, we have a Cyrus DPS of about 12 million, which still is really good. It won't kill Ubers as mentioned, but it should be fine for any normal boss like normal Cyrus, normal Maven, normal Eater of Worlds, normal Sealing Exarch, and I think it could even do invitations, but I haven't tried it. For that I will just use the bosser honestly. This one was really just go run maps really quick, run juice maps and have fun. So with all that generic damage, Headhunter, physical converted to physical is extra elemental, just do so much damage. We can, in a map, our tooltip DPS can very easily reach 2 million or more. And now it gets even crazier when we count the projectiles up. So let's go for this example. We have one projectile, we have the Sensi Endless Munition giving us 2 more projectiles, then we use Fan of Blades on 2 notables adding up to 5 projectiles. Then our Divergent Cobra Lash has 5 base chain on it. So each projectile already chains 5 times. We then add a 6th chain from our Sensi, we add 3 chains from the Helmet enchantment, and we can add 3 more chains from using Awakened chain. On top of that, we can use Awakened fork to add additional 2 forks, and with that we have 5 initial projectiles that split with that fork to 10, then fork to 20. In those 20 projectiles, chain 12 times, adding up to a total of 275 hits per attack. And with our attack speed, we do several attacks a second. It just gets very crazy. And it gets even more crazier. I don't do the math for this because I'm too scared for this number. Dying Sun, Headhunter. Fully buffed, you are at 12 projectiles and 14 chains. So you have 12 up to because of the 2 forks. Then times that times itself times 12. That plus itself times 12. Times 14. It is a crazy amount of hits. Like, just crazy how much it will feel like you're playing with explosions, honestly. It sometimes felt to me like that. I'm using Herald of Ash and Ice in the Delirium footage, but even without that, it just, because of the sheer amount of projectiles you're spraying out in one direction, it feels like you're exploding screens. And I'm really happy with that. It just feels really, really amazing. But anyway, with those selling points out of the way, if you're still interested in this build, and I assume you are because it's just really amazing build, let's take a look at the actual build guide. First, the Ascendencies. We are picking up the Deadeye Ascendency as presumed with the name of this build, Ricochet for +1 chain, Endless Munition for +2 projectiles, Gathering Winds for Tailwind and increased action speed, so more movement speed, more attack speed, and finally Focal Point to get Sniper's Mark effect, reduced damage taken from targets near this marked target, and to get our Sniper's Mark to jump between targets when our Sniper's Mark on hit is down. It is on cooldown. And as a bonus, we're using Forbidden Flame and Flash to take up a Nature's Reprisal, giving us 40% of physical damage converted to chaos damage, and more chaos damage with attack skills. This is one of the 2 things that we have for chaos damage. Everything else, as mentioned, is generic damage. So with this, we are converting 100% of our physical damage to chaos damage, allowing us to use the physical claw and allowing us to utilize the Inspired Learning Headhunter buffs to get crazy amounts of conversion going. Now for our Pantheon Bandits. Early on you could help Alira. However, later on you do want the passive points. So I would say, if you can, kill all early, you have so much crit multi very quickly that you don't need the crit multi from Alira, and the resistances you will be able to manage as well. So again, early on, you can use either. You can help Alira if you're in a league start scenario or SSF scenario and you don't have the much gear or passive points yet, you're only playing a bit, Alira works fine. But later on you do want the passive points, you have very passive point stuff, there's a lot of things that you want on the tree, and you will need the passive points. Then for the Pantheon, you can use Soul of the Brine King to be freeze immune and to have reduced effect on chill on you. And you can use the Soul of Aberrus to be immune by burning grounds. And once you are able to reach 100% elemental avoidance, which is something you can do with this build, you can get Soul of Lunaris for the projection, and for the small one you can take whatever you prefer. Because of the Headhunter buffs and Inspired Learnings, you are immune to a lot of things already, so it doesn't really matter what you take with the small. There you just take whatever you prefer once you're immune to Burning Ground. And with that, we come to the passive tree. The passive tree is, as mentioned, fairly simple. We take some life, some more life, and a bit more life after that. We want claw damage. We are using the claw and the dagger notable mastery for the Nightblade elusive interaction, with elusive granting us crit multi, and the other one granting us for our increased elusive effect from Nightblade, giving us a lot of crit multi from that interaction. And the other claw notable, we are using poisoned enemies cannot critical strike, which is what I mentioned. So this allows us to never be critical strike, because anything that survives a few attacks will be attacked by us a few times as well, which means after those few attacks they have to be poisoned at least once, and once they're poisoned they cannot critical strike. Really nice survivability layer. We also take that one tiny node of life and mana on hit, so we have a bit of mana on hit, adding up with our clarity and potential mana regeneration somewhere on the gear to give us a good chunk of survivability, a good chunk of mana sustain, so we can attack that crazy amount of times that we are actually able to do. Then we take some spell suppression on the tree. On the mastery there, I would say use the use the crit chance increased by spell suppression chance. Later on it's not fully needed, but I like to still use it to have a consistently high crit chance. Then we take a bit of accuracy rating with the precision mastery. We take reservation grace mastery for the evasion, and we take the charisma and the mana reservation there. Later on, when we have some mana reservation efficiency on gear, we can, instead of the reservation efficiency on the mastery, pick up increased aura effect on us to add a bit more survivability on the build. And then we pick up point blank, more crit multi, and the Mark Mastery for Cutting Strike and for Frenzy Charge generation on single targets. And that is basically the tree. After that we just go for clusters. We want 2 large clusters, 4 medium and 1 small cluster. On the large cluster we want Fan of Blades. On the medium cluster we want Follow Through and Repeater. Repeater giving us a bit of attack speed and projectile damage. And then on the small cluster we want Enduring Composure. Enduring Composure allows us to generate endurance charges when we've been getting hit recently. So with this, we are getting our endurance charges. Once we get a tiny hit in, we generate endurance charges, which helps us survive more. And for the rest of the jewels, they are very straightforward. We already mentioned the Forbidden Flame and Flash, so we want to have that in 2 sockets. We want a Watcher's Eye with negative mana cost or minus mana cost, while affected by Clarity. And if you want to spend a lot on the Watchers, you can take Precision Attack Damage or Precision Crit Multi to get even more damage out of this. But just the mana cost is already pretty good. There are some cheaper options like blinding stuff when they're hitting you, but there is not really anything mandatory on the Watcher's Eye except that mana cost while affected by Clarity. Then we want to use an Inspired Learning or at least a Pride with double damage once we have a Headhunter. And then we can use a rare jewel with crit multi, life, and attack speed, preferable while wielding a one-handed weapon. And with that, we have our jewel sockets filled, and we can move on to the skill gems section. For the skill gems, we want to use Divergent Cobra Lash as our main link. The Divergent party is actually very important, so we want to use that from the get-go as if possible, like get it as early as possible. It will just add a huge amount of single target damage. We're using Nightblade, of course, we're using crit damage for even more crit multi, crit chance support, void manipulation, and added chaos damage. Now later on we can replace void manipulation and chaos damage with the awakened versions. On level 5 those will give you +1 to your Cobra Lash. If you get those on level 5, if you get +1 from your amulet and +1 from the body armor and a level Tron Divergent Cobra Lash, you actually get a 6 chain from the Cobra Lash. Excuse me, sorry for that. Which gives you another 1,000,000 points of damage, which is really nice for single target. However, for mapping, we do want to replace void manipulation with awakened fork for allowing us to do elemental damage. Void manipulation says you deal no elemental damage and you cannot deal physical damage. So with that, you need Cobra Lash with fork supported so that your your Fizz as extra elemental actually gives you more damage. Now, our crit chance we can replace with Awakened Chain for a similar reason. In maps, we will sooner or later kill an assassin mob. With assassin, every hit we do critical strikes. And even without that, we're still sitting at a comfortable 75% chance critical strike. So we have no issue critical striking, and chain just adds more damage, more clear, and not more damage. It adds slightly less damage than crit chance, but it adds more clear, and that makes it worth it. And with 100% crit chance adds no damage, so Awakened Chain is more damage in the end again. Making our 6th link very situational. On bosses, we want to use the upper version, the main part, with crit chance, chaos damage, void manipulation, and on leveling setup, and when we are mapping, we just replace chain, chance, crit chance, and void manipulation with chain and fork, and have amazing clear. Now, keep this in mind at this point. This build can run almost any map mod. It has some slight issues with cannot regenerate early on and later on as well. And because of the mana on hit, it doesn't need that, but sometimes you need to whirl dash enemies to regain your mana before you can use your main skill again. So cannot regenerate maps are a bit annoying. Reduced aura effect are a bit annoying but doable. But the one thing that isn't doable anymore, once you use Awakened Fork, you cannot do elemental reflect maps. Because of getting the Fizz is extra elemental from the Inspired Learning or Headhunter buff, you won't be able to do reflect maps once you get Awakened Fork into the build. So just keep that in mind. The other skills we are using are Whirling Blades, Fast Attacks, and Flame Dash for our mobility. Flame Dash doesn't have to be linked to Whirling Blades, I just put it in the mobility section. For utility, we are using Blood Range for attack speed, Frenzy Charge generation in map, and some leech. We are using Withering Step, in this case Anomalous. Anomalous gives us more wizard debuffs on the enemies when they first enter the Withering Step circle. So setting our Withering Step debuffs to 11. Then we use, for single targets, Ancestral Protector linked with multiple totems and Withering Touch to keep those Withering Steps up. So Withering Step sets it to 11. Withering Touch gives us to 15 and keeps them at 15, because we have 2 Ancestral Protectors with multiple totems. They just keep attacking the boss, keeping our Withering Touch up at a high rate. And also we are using Divergent on the Ancestral Protector, which gives an increased buff effect. More attack speed for us means more damage for us. It's a really nice combination. So our card skill, we would like to use War Molten Shell. Now, War Molten Shell is optional actually. We can just use normal Molten Shell, but either is fine. We use Molten Shell because of the armor we are using. And you can use it in cards of damage setup, but I like to just have it on left click. It's for mapping, it's definitely good enough. As our Auras, we want to use Determination. Now in this case, Divergent is optional. It's definitely better than normal Determination, but it's not needed. Normal Grace, a Defiance Banner, in this case we would prefer it with Anomalous for even more survivability, but normal Defiance Banner is good enough. Then we want Flesh and Stone. In this case, Anomalous is actually not that pricey, not that expensive, so you can easily pick that up and get even more armor and evasion rating. But a normal Flesh and Stone is okay enough. And just in this case, it is not that hard to get, so I didn't put the Anomalous as optional in the brackets. We want a high level precision and a level 1 clarity, with a level 1 clarity utilizing for our Watcher's Eye, and our curses are Sniper's Mark, Mark on Hit, and Life Tap. Life Tap is used so our Sniper's Mark is consistent, we can keep it at any level. Level 1 to level 20, as far as I know, doesn't make a difference. Then on Mark on Hit, we want to use the Divergent quality. In this case, the divergent quality gives us like 2% increased damage, but isn't needed. And we also are getting the spare on hit from our gear, which we will come to in a moment. And that are basically our links. There isn't really too many changes. When you have an Aura Bot, you could and Aura Bot and then Inspired Learning or a Headhunter, you can replace Determination, Grace and Defiance banner with Herald of Ash, Purity and Ice to have more damage, and your Aura Bot is going to take the survivability auras. You want to keep Precision and Clarity on your end. Clarity, so you always have the mana cost and the reduced mana cost uptime at any point. In Precision also, so you have the offensive accuracy rating that you want up at any point. Right, getting into the gear section. For our weapon, we want to start with a Wasp Nest. The Wasp Nest is adding a good amount of damage, but we want to very quickly get our medium budget, like a 500 physical DPS claw. Because of the way this build works, the physical DPS is like a 20% increase from the Wasp Nest already. And when we get to min-maxing, we basically just want an even better claw, like 600, 650 physical DPS. Anything works fine, it just like more damage and more crazy damage numbers. For the medium budget, you will get something like an Essence crafted physical claw. So you have Essence spamming till you hit like a T3, T2, T1 percent physical damage accuracy hybrid wall, and then use an Iceling Slam with prefix can't be changed to get the physical with poison chance on hit, unveil on it, or any alternatives there. And then you have crafted a critical strike chance with strength and intelligence, and somehow try to get attack speed or crit multi on it. With you can get either with this prefix can be changed reforge attack speed or reforge crit, or if you can get one fractured, you could then get the other one with the reforge and craft the last. On the min-max clause mentioned, it's just that with better numbers, really just higher physical damage to get the numbers even crazier. For our shield, we are going to start with any shield with high spell suppression, life, and a resistance. On a medium budget, we want even more spell suppression, even more life, even more resistances on it. And our min-maxing, we would preferably have, we would really to min-max, we will take an unveiled Fist is Extra Chaos, which you only can get dropped from, I think, Gravicus, was it? Then recombine it on a base that has a high amount of spell suppression and elemental resistances, and an open suffix to craft chance to avoid elemental ailments, and then have a good amount of life on it. That would be the perfect shield, but honestly the physical damage to Extra Chaos is purely optional and is not needed. We already have a good amount of damage. It would be a lot easier to just get the spell suppression, high life, resistances, and then the craft a chance to avoid elemental ailments. For the helmet, we can start with Skull. It has everything we need. It has a high life and a single resistances. To start off, that is all we want, and the shrines is an added effect that we can utilize. Once we get to medium budget, and that is actually something that we want fairly quickly, like after we get the claw, and at the same priority level as the body armor, would be this helmet. We want a helmet with Cobra Lash chain 3 times, because 3 times are roughly 300 increased damage at in a max setup once we get the ashes and we get the clusters. On the helmet, pretty much just have to have resistances in life. We can also craft +1 to socketed AoE gems to have +1 level to our auras, which we can then socket in our helmet. When we get to min-maxing, we would preferably want more defenses or more resistance on the helm. We want more life on the helm, and then we want an unveiled +2, so we have more level on the auras again. But that again is not really fully needed. As our implicits on a helmet, once we get to min-maxing territory, we would like to have from the Eater of Worlds the reduced increased mana reservation efficiency, and from the Seeing Exarchs the reduced mana cost of skills, so that we have less mana cost on our active skill, because once we use Awakened Fork and Awakened Chain, there's actually a lot of mana cost on our main link that we need to reduce to utilize it well. Now to the body armor. The body armor is early on, well, tabular, but also not really. Tabular works well early on, but very quickly we want a body armor that at least has +1 curse and some crit chance for our attacks. Now we want to couple that with life and increase life preferably, or any craft we can do. or resistances if needed, but once we get to the medium budget level, we would preferably want an elevated +1 to active skill jumps, because that gives us turn quality to active skill jump, which again gives us 7.5 increased damage per chain. Then we want the additional curse and a tier 1 crit multi. So the way to make this would be to have the elevated socketed active gems on one race, and on the other one would be the +1 curse. You would awaken orbit and hope that you have either an empty prefix or you have a walled life on it, and then you would do prefix can't be changed. If it's an empty prefix, you would need to multi-mod it, of course, but prefix can be changed. Reforge crit to have the Reforge attack, to have the attack crit on it, and it's a 1 and 2 to get T1 and a 1 and 2 to get T2. Early on either is fine, but very quickly try to get to a T1. In a min-max scenario, we're doing something similar. Just this time, we want definitely a high life wall on it, and also we want it on Astro Plate because of the added all rest we have on the Astro Plate. And then we want to have an Iceling Slammed Chaos Hybrid Resistance and a crafted Chaos Hybrid Resistance. We are doing this in a min-max scenario to get our Chaos Resistance as high as possible, because on the medium budget version, our Chaos Resist isn't that good looking. So we are trying to improve that on the min-max version. For our gloves, we are starting with basically attack speed, resistance, and life. When we get to a medium budget, we want to get some spell suppression on the gloves, and we could either craft a resistance there, or crit chance and chaos damage if we crit recently, which is a nice thing to have. But in a min-max scenario, we would preferably have a rage with attacks, increased effect of our marks. For offensive power, or instead of marks, you can take spell suppression if you still need that. And then on the gloves, we would want to recombine damage while leeching with some life and an attack speed. And then for the suffixes, we want chaos res and a crafted hybrid res, and the attack speed, which I forgot is a suffix, but that is a very pricey. You could get all that without the damage while leeching as an in-between budget, but I would say trying to get the damage while leeching will give you a lot of damage, because we are Blood Rage, our life is never fully consistently full, so either we are at full, then get a bit lower, we are leeching a bit, getting life on hit, so we are always kind of having the damage while leeching. For our boots, those are very straightforward for the first two stages. Two-tone base for resistances, life, more resistances, and crafted movement speed with chance to get onslaught. With this we have onslaught, we have elusive from Nightblade, and we have tailwind from our Ascendency. We have elusive, tailwind, onslaught. We don't even need it on our boots, we get it only with onslaught on the boots, we already get it. On the medium budget we want the same, but we want it with more resistances. And on the high budget we would then go looking to use the same base because it's a high base armor evasion rating, but this time we will try to fit a lot of stuff here. So we want to fit our elemental avoidance as an implicit from the Eater of Worlds, and as an implicit and as an essence modifier from the Loathing Essence. With that, combining it with a good amount of resistance and a T1 spell suppression wall, we can cap out our spell suppression with shield and boots, and our elemental avoidance also with shield and boots. Then we again try to get a high life on it, we try to get the movement speed with onslaught on it, probably as an Iceling Unveil so we have more movement speed, and then we're just going to craft armor and evasion rating for some additional defenses. As the last implicit, we can take chaos resistance or any elemental resistance that is missing, but preferable chaos resistance and fitting the elemental resistance in a different way. Finally, we get to the amulet. Early on, we just want amulet with resistances or stats live just to fit what is lacking. Then very quickly, after we got the body armor, the helmet enchantment, the proper physical damage claw, and decent gear on the rest of the stuff, we want to work towards an Ashes of the Stars. Ashes with 30 quality adds, what is it, 21 increased damage per chain, so it adds up a lot of damage. It also gives us +1 to all skill gems, which is good, and it fits reservation efficiency, meaning we can get on the instead of the mastery reservation efficiency, can get the increased aura effect. And then we want to anoint Heart of Darkness on it. This is our second notable that does anything with chaos. Everything else, as mentioned, is generic damage. Heart of Darkness gives us a bit of chaos pen and a bit of chaos damage. And then also on a min-max version, of course, we want it perfectly void for the reservation efficiency and the quality. Before that, just get the quality as high void as possible. That gets us to the rings. The rings are a bit of a special case because a medium budget already requires rings that we can basically use for the rest of the league. To start off, we want any ring with despair on it and have life on it, and the other ring we want high intelligence roll, and then just a high life roll, and then any crafted resistances. When we get to the medium budget, we want a ring with high intelligence, preferable resistance and despair on hit, and then get a good amount of life roll, and crafted non-channeling skills have -7 to mana cost. And on the other ring, we want intelligence again, we want double resistance, we want life, and we want again the non-channeling skills have negative cost. To get that, it is fairly pricey. Those rings are a bit pricey, but you can use them basically for the rest of the league for this build. Because once you have intelligence, resistance, spare on hit, and an okay amount of life, you don't really need to upgrade from it any further. Getting stuff like crit multi, life on hit, physical to attacks, all that isn't really needed. Because the rings already are fairly pricey, I will just try to get those mods and be happy with it. And the basis, either Vermilion ring for life, Coral ring for life, Amethyst ring for chaos resistance, or two-toned if you need any elemental resistances. As for the belt, we can use a tactician to start off. It gives us the strength and intelligence, which is really needed for this build. We are basically just in the dexterity section of the tree, but we need 155 intelligence and 155 strength to utilize our whole gear. It makes it a nice, really passive points, stat points, and stats and resistance stuff. So with this, we want to use a tactician early on, then upgrade it to a Stygian Wise, which has a high strength roll, resistances, life, and then armor and evasion rating crafted. And what we can do is we could craft chance to not consume flask charges, Slam and Hunter's Orb, Hunter's Exalted Orb, to either get like chaos damage, percentage life, or flask charge on crit charge, flask charge on crit, to then have a Stygian Wise we can use whenever we kill a boss, whenever we do anything that a Headhunter is not going to work. And then in any other case, on a mid-max scenario, we just want to use a Headhunter with high strength roll, with high life roll, and just run through maps and have our fun. With that, we are getting to the flasks. The flask, we are wanting to use a diamond, a jade, a granite, and a quartz flask. The quartz flask we are mainly using for phasing, but we can also utilize the spell suppression on it, assuming we cannot cap it with our gear because we had not that good wall. On the life flask, we want a divine life flask, seizing preferable, so we have the recovery when we are on low life, and then using anti-bleed, anti-corrupted blood. The rest of the flasks are basically either with getting a charge when we are getting hit, or getting a charge when we are doing a critical strike, and then having suffixes for reduced curse effect, increased armor, increased evasion, and then basically whatever on the last flask. And later on, we want to replace the diamond flask with the bottled phase. It has all the crit chance we need, and it gives us increased damage taken. Our only other source of increased damage taken on this build is basically the sniper's mark. So the bottled phase is actually adding a good amount of damage, being a sulfur flask for 40% increased damage, and then adding the increased damage from being on consecrated ground when enemies are there. And then on juice content, once we don't really need the life flask anymore, you can use the Dying Sun. With the Dying Sun, first, your Cobra Lash is going to look a lot better. And second, you don't really need the life flask, because either you're going to kill stuff and getting healed with life on hit, or you're going to die. And once you have your Headhunter buffs, it's juiced content, it's going to be the first one. You're just going to attack stuff, you're not going to need the life flask. For looting is a separate part, but then you can just restock with the life flask in. That brings us to the leveling section. Now for leveling, I have to admit, it is not the best build for leveling if you don't like Spectral Helix. You can use for leveling either a Twin setup or leveling setup with Spectral Helix, Rain of Arrows, or Hollow Palm. Each will work, but Rain of Arrows and Hollow Palm will need also passive points, so you will need to respec later on. Spectral Helix, you can basically use the leveling tree that I have in the passive building, and you can utilize it with and just use that and Spectral Helix as a damaging skill, and it will work fine. It will have enough damage. It's not going to be clearing everything at a single hit, but it's going to be fairly okay for leveling. And the other variant you can do is Caustic Arrow into Cobra Lash at level 19. When you do Cobra Lash at level 19, your clear will feel okay, your rare kill will feel meh, but your single target will feel really, really bad. So which is why I recommend Spectral Helix. In my passive building, which I can actually just show, we have a leveling section on the trees. As you can see here, I mentioned the levelings with some notes up to the 123 points. Then in the notes you also see the leveling, what skills I recommend to use at what level. Also mentioning that you could use Spectral Helix at that point. I've used Spectral Helix for the leveling part after I struggled a bit with Cobra Lash. So Spectral Helix definitely will feel better. However, there is one point. When you do your first lap and you want to get +1 chain, because once you get +2 projectiles and +1 chain, Cobra Lash will work out for leveling, but till then you cannot use it. But Spectral Helix with +1 chain interacts very weirdly. So when you get your first lap and you're leveling Spectral Helix, don't spec into anything. Get the passive points, move on, do your second lap and get +2 chain. Or if you're Trink leveling, get a Wind Dancer. Gale Force, sorry. Get Gale Force to have your Tailwind, and then respec it at +1 chain and get the +2 projectiles on the second lap. That is but just for min-maxing. I would say just don't spec into anything. Spectral Helix will still feel fine for clearing and doing damage. It's just not to the liking of everybody, so I kept in the Cobra Lash leveling. And that brings us to the last section of this guide, the Magic Find or Carry variant. I already mentioned the Aura setup that you can switch to, but when you do magic finding, what you can use is, you can use in a solo setup, Venter's Gambit, Zadima's Touch, and Goldworm as your boots. In this regard, you need to have the Venter's Gambit to keep your resistances kept. And the Zadima's Touch, you're going to get Corrupted with Despair on hit. It's a lot cheaper than Elemental Weakness on hit, but for this build works perfectly fine. With this setup, you should still be somewhat resistances kept, and the rest you can get with the Headhunter by killing a few rares, so just be careful at the beginning of the map. But if you have a supporter, like an Aura bot that has your resistance or a crossbot that has Purity of Elements, you can use a Pariah instead. You can use Severika's Answer, or however the shield is called. I know the path for this answer, I just always forget the name in the beginning. And then so use Zadima's Touch and Goldworm to have more quantity. With this you get like 40 to 53 quantity to easily use quantity maps or start magic finding in Promenade or Crimson Temple or whatever you prefer. And that's basically all. It really works well. Just keep in mind that when you do use a Headhunter or Inspired Learning, you want to replace Void Manipulation with Awakened Fork. And that being said, that was the build guide. Again, I would really appreciate if you could give some feedback. If you have any improvements that I could do, or if I missed anything, please tell. And that being said, have a wonderful day. Hopefully this guide was enjoyable, and I wish you lots of fun with this build if you decide playing it. If not, lots of fun anyways. Have a great day.